If you're here and you're already a fan of the Stories with Traction podcast with Matt ZAUN, we have got a treat for you today. So I'm Claire Davis. I'm the CEO and founder of Traction Resume, and we help careerists tell their stories on paper so they can lead the careers that fulfill them. And Matt and I have been working together for about 4 years, and after producing so many episodes and really understanding how you must tell your story to achieve your goals, we finally decided to come together so that we can answer some of the frequently asked questions that the business leaders that Matt coaches and the career executives that I work with are always asking us. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy this 15-minute FAQ sprint as we walk through some of your most burning questions. Thanks for joining us.
Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode.
So, Matt, how do you use storytelling to persuade or influence people?
Okay, the first thing is not mentioning to them, let me persuade you. Okay, so I say that because there is something that people do that is a big no-no. It is prefacing a story by saying, let me tell you a story. That is something that someone is going to immediately look at their watch and they're going to roll their eyes thinking, oh, I have to listen to a story. You just dive right into it. Okay, so how do you persuade someone? You need to know who they are and then know what hero is going to relate to that person so they can see themselves in your story and then utilize that story to get what you want. So as an example, you have a prospect and they ask you a question. You don't try to persuade them on this is the best product in X, Y, and Z. We've done so much market research and we're the best company in this region and like trying to persuade. You simply say, I understand where you're coming from. You know, we just got that question 2 weeks ago. Someone called and said, hey, basically reciting the same question, and then you're sharing a story where that person was in an ordinary world and now they're in a completely new reality because they bought your product or service. So they're seeing themselves in that story. So indirectly, you are persuading them. You're not coming across as not only that you're not persuading, they don't even know you're really sharing a story with them. They shouldn't be thinking to themselves, oh, look, you're trying to sell me by sharing the story with me. They're just going to be inclined to listen because they see themselves inserted in that story.
I like that. Why are stories so important in business?
So stories are important in business because they're important in every aspect of our lives. So it's really important to recognize just the sheer importance of stories that we have as people. So there is an element of grabbing someone's attention. I'm not taking away from that. And I've mentioned numerous times because of so much noise, we do want to grab our audience's attention. But people are still willing to listen to 3-hour podcasts and they're still willing to binge Netflix episodes. So it's not that timing is an issue. It is that, are we really engaging someone when it comes to that story? So to answer your question simply, it's not only important in business, it's important in every single aspect of life. That's why it's important in business, because it's an element of our lives.
And so if somebody's going to use this power, really leverage storytelling, how do they know how to choose the right story for their audience?
So it's important to do a little bit of testing prior, and we've done episodes on that, on testing. But once you know your audience, you're going to get a good feel for, is the story landing or not? Because let's say sales, as an example, sales. If you are in sales, you get asked the same 7 to 10 questions ad nauseum. I mean, you could probably recite them in your sleep. If that's the case, good companies have responses to those questions. Great companies have strategic stories that connect with those questions. And also most people, most organizations, when it comes to sales, the individuals that they're selling to typically fit within like an 80% type persona, right? So they're going out there, it's the same makeup, right? The same person when it comes to that ICP/C on different episodes that we've gone into. So it's important to recognize once you have that dialed in, then the story is going to be more relatable. When it comes to marketing, there's more testing that goes into it. So you're basically putting a story out, and if it works, you're going to utilize it again. You might retweak that story and then share. When it comes to a staff meeting, I actually think it's almost easier because like that person knows their team better than anyone. They've done work with people potentially for years. I mean, they know their audience. If they have a team of 20 people and they've had so many interactions with them, they don't need to worry about like, who is that person? Like they should know them pretty well and they should know what stories stick well.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know that obviously we talk all the time about how storytelling is so incredibly important in marketing, right? Really connecting with that customer, which is right along the lines of what you're sharing about getting to know them to a point where you know exactly what to share with them. So how do you use storytelling in marketing?
In marketing specifically?
Yeah. What are some of the ways?
So one of the ways is you need to understand what your marketing plan is, like what are the channels that you're utilizing when it comes to marketing. And then the best way to do it is have as robust of a story bank as possible, and then have specific stories when it comes to timing. So this is so important because people, so for me personally, I make sure that I'm sharing a story every single day. Now that might sound bewildering to some people, but there's 365 days in a year. So it's simple for me to recognize if I have 365 stories in my marketing story bank, I can share one a day. And over time, it builds and builds and builds. And this is how people can amass story banks with thousands of stories in them. You want to hit 1,000 stories? That is 3 years of coming up with a story every day gets you over 1,000 stories. So when it comes to having teams of people that are inserting stories into the story bank, you can amass a story bank very quick when it comes to marketing.
And I can attest too, because I remember when you first mentioned this to me and said, story every day. You can write a story every day. And it was such a challenge in the beginning, but then once you do it over and over, the stories tend to flow and it becomes easier to really pull at what's happening in life to create them. So I love that. It does get easier. So we're talking about sharing those stories. What types of content should we be using or creating to share them?
So I always recommend people have specific content buckets, I like to call them. And I really recommend people stick to 3. Okay, so first, we actually remember odd numbers versus even numbers. There's research to back that up. So if you are, let's say you're presenting, it's 3 points or 5 points, never 4 or 6, right? You want to stick to those odd numbers. This is also important when it comes to our content buckets as well. So what do you want to focus on? So if someone listening wants to focus on leadership would be a content bucket. And think of how many subcategories can fall under leadership. I mean, it'd be very vast, right? Then they'd have another content bucket. Maybe that content bucket would be communication. So then under communication, there'd be different subcategories as well. And then maybe another bucket would be trust, right? Let's say they want to build trust with someone. So this is where they're utilizing stories of family members with business themes intertwined, right? Because they're not just someone online or some sales rep. They're a family person, right? They have children that they're responsible for. So just as an example, but it could be anything. For me personally, one of my content buckets is strategic storytelling, right? Because I love talking about storytelling and helping people overcome all of the mistakes I've made when it comes to storytelling. For other people, it's going to be different, but I really recommend people focus on 3 different content buckets.
And now we've got these content buckets together. We know kind of the different ways to share them. What do you recommend when it comes to where people should share their stories?
So they need to share their stories where their audience is. So from a marketing capacity, for me personally, it's LinkedIn. Right? It's LinkedIn, it's this podcast, it's email marketing. That's because a lot of my audience members utilize those channels. If someone listening to this doesn't have an audience on LinkedIn and their people aren't on LinkedIn, maybe they're utilizing another social media platform, but that's where the marketing piece would be. When it comes to sales, it's however your sales process is. So it could be in-person meetings, if that's what you do to close sales. It could be virtual. I also want people to recognize virtual and in-person are vastly different when it comes to the sales process. I actually believe that's more often than not, virtual platforms can be more difficult when it comes to sales. So we need to make sure that we're connecting on a virtual, whether it's Teams or Zoom is irrelevant, but you want to be able to present as if you're presenting in person. This is something a lot of people miss. So if they are presenting on let's say a Zoom platform, most people present standing. Are you standing on a Zoom call? If not, you might want to change that, right? If you are presenting. Eye contact, right? We're in a room full of people, having really good eye contact is important. Is someone actually looking at the camera when they're speaking to someone? So it's really where's the story going to land for that person specifically?
I think for those listening too, if they're starting to consider stories in their mind that they want to tell, and for those who are thinking, gosh, I mean, do I have any stories worth telling? Like I didn't lose my arm to a shark and like climb Mount Kilimanjaro, you know? So what makes a story interesting? Does it have to be like a catastrophic or monumental event to be really interesting?
All right, so it's funny that you mentioned that because we get asked that question all the time, right? Because sometimes I've even had people mention to me like they wish horrific experiences happened to them so they could have better stories.
Oh, Lord.
You should be very thankful that you've never experienced a shark bite or that you haven't had a major injury climbing Mount Everest, right? And plus, those stories are not relatable to the average person. And the most powerful aspect is being relatable. If someone really has that connection with the story, that's the most important part. So for anyone out there that thinks to themselves, oh man, I don't have this riveting story, that's not the type of story that's going to be relatable. It's good for conference speaking, right? To have someone stand up and say, you know, they had to cut their arm off because they were stuck in a mountain or something. And there are stories like that, but that is so unrelatable that we need to focus on relatable stories. And when it comes to like more of a show, so to speak, because there is a stage dynamic when we're in person in front of a large audience, you can still share a story very powerfully depending on delivery. I truly believe that there are people that can make average stories sound amazing based on how they're delivering it, because delivery is so important.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, are there certain key elements that they're using that it's making it just incredibly captivating?
Movement's important. Eye contact is extremely important. I recommend when it comes to eye contact, a lot of people get their eye contact wrong. They stare at someone too long. So when it comes to eye contact, your reptilian brain actually comes to play where someone actually views you as a threat. So you actually want to utilize eye contact in a very powerful but meaningful way. So if you're in front of people, the way eye contact would work is you're speaking and you're looking at someone, and then you mention a point, and then you're shifting your focus and you're looking at someone else. And then you're shifting your focus again. A lot of people just have their eyes bouncing all around the room. It's not intentional. They're not connecting with people. Or even worse, they're staring at someone too long and the person is starting to feel uncomfortable. Okay. It's amazing. I would say the overwhelming majority of people do that. They don't recognize they're doing it, but they're actually doing themselves a disservice by utilizing incorrect eye contact.
I'm sure many people are nodding along while they're listening to this podcast because when we were young, we were taught, make eye contact with me. You know, I want to make sure you're listening. At least I know I use that with my kids. So how can someone, now that we know that, you know, stage dynamics are important, movement's important, the way that we tell the story is important, how can storytelling be used to build trust with customers?
So the way trust is built is the person sees themselves in the story. And also it is okay to mention mistakes. So as an example, if I was to share with you a mistake that I made, I may say, hey, listen, I remember working with certain clients and this wasn't working out. And then one of my clients came to me and said, hey, Matt, have you ever thought about doing X, Y, and Z? And I took this client's advice and I did it. And it worked out really well for me. So I'm telling you, hey, I'm willing to change. I'm willing to listen to feedback. I'm willing to listen. And it's a way to build trust without me saying, hey, trust me. Can you trust me? Can you just trust me? Like, that doesn't work. It's indirectly saying you can trust me in that capacity. Also, another thing that's really important is the family dynamic, utilizing family stories with business themes intertwined. So when I go into an audience that I know my wife as a hero in my story is going to be very relatable to the audience, that is when I'm heaping praise on my wife, sharing different things that she's taught me, because it builds trust. I talk about my kids all the time because, again, it builds trust because people are viewing me as a father, not just some guy online or not just some guy in front of them trying to sell them on a certain process. So that is a really powerful way to build trust.
I love that. It's so incredibly relatable. And there's like a feeling of safety there almost when you can connect with people in that way. So the next thing I'd love to hear you talk about is how to use humor in storytelling. Because I know you have roots in improv and other things that you've studied, but we'll have to wait because this is only 15 minutes of FAQs. So until next time, thanks for sharing all that strategy.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.